All right, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. I am so glad for this chilly weather on Friday before fall break here in Nashville. And I hope that you're enjoying your Friday as well. This morning, we are talking about systematic reading intervention and how do we do this virtually as special educators and EL educators. This is a big part of our role, is making sure that students have access to reading intervention and the tools they need to learn to read. So we're going to talk about that this morning and how we can do these practices virtually. We'll chat for 15 minutes and then at the end, we'll open it up for questions, but please feel free to add questions to the chat. We'll share the full slide deck afterwards. We have some resources for you as well, but that'll be the structure of this morning. For those of you who don't know, we are the Diverse Learners Cooperative, and our mission is to connect teachers and leaders to the professional learning resources and networks they need to do better for diverse learners, students with disabilities and multilingual learners, and ultimately just to support you where you're at so that you're able to keep going in this work because it's really important. So this morning, we are going to consider how to provide effective reading instruction. Talk about what is effective reading instruction, what it should look like, how we can do that virtually, and then what we can do next. We have, like I said, we have some resources for you to do that. So first, just to kick it off is the why, right? Students who do not read proficiently by 4th grade are 4 times more likely to drop out of school. It puts the emphasis on early literacy. It puts the emphasis on making sure that our kids are prepared with the skills and tools that they need in order to unlock the code. The Matthew effect states that early success in acquired reading skills leads to later success in reading as the learner grows across ages, across grade levels. And so it's really important to tackle those skills early. When we think about the components of an effective reading instruction, while these may not all be in one lesson, but over the course of the week, we definitely need to hit each of these areas. And those areas are phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So that's how we'll structure our conversation today, knowing that those are the effective components of reading instruction. And then what makes reading instruction effective? It needs to be 2 things, 1, systematic, and 2, explicit. That we have a planned progression of and sequence of skills. This link here is just a 1-pager of sequenced phonics skills, which could be very helpful. We need to leverage routines, offering multiple opportunities to practice and apply those tasks within and be able to assess their skills as we go. Explicit, we need to clearly define the skill, model the skill, pay attention to how we use the skill, when we use the skill, and we can do it with multi-sensory modalities. When we think about what's on the market right now as far as systematic reading and interventions, these are 3 of the most common, and we dug into each one of their websites and research bases to see what they've done in response to the fact that much of the country is learning virtually here. The one that we were most impressed with was iSpire, or Spire is the reading intervention title, and it has a fully built out virtual system that goes with it that incorporates each of the components, the 10-step lesson plan associated with that model of instruction. Wilson has an online interactive hub that you can use for both teachers and students. They provide student durables, meaning materials that can be used over and over again that you can provide for students' use at home, as well as at-home packets. SRA Reading Mastery, really popular program, not as much online, and with the online component. So something to think about when you are providing reading mastery is how will you ensure that students have the right materials and can see the right thing at the right time to engage in the intervention. So Mary is going to walk through each of these components and think about what we do to do this virtually.
Thanks, Brooke. So as Brooke mentioned earlier, there are multiple components to reading in order to be able to be a fluent reader and to understand what you're reading. And like many of you, when I was teaching, there was just not enough time in the day to get those all in one lesson. So it is okay to get those through in multiple lessons throughout the course of the week. A lot of times you'll have lessons that have multiple of these components. You might do some components every time you teach reading, but you might have other components that are spaced out across multiple lessons. You might have a lesson plan that looks like the one on the right. If not, we've provided a template that I'll preview for you at the end. But the big question that surrounds our work here today is, how can I do all of these things virtually, especially when reading seems to be needed to be done in person or using specific tangible materials. We wanted to explore how to look at each of these different components. So the first one we want to talk about is phonemic awareness, and this is going to involve a lot of our sound activities. Our goal here is to really notice and manipulate the individual sounds in spoken language. So again, this is apart from letters. We want to make sure that students are understanding how to hear sounds in a word, how to identify how many sounds, because this will help with their decoding skills and their encoding or spelling and writing skills later. Now, before, we might have asked students to count sounds in a given word or have them use tiles that they might manipulate to indicate how many sounds there were. Virtually, what you could do is you could use these same types of manipulatives, and either you can manipulate them yourself as the teacher during modeling, or you can use some other interactive tools as well to have students manipulate sounds on their own. So for example, again, all the pictures here when you get the slide deck will be linked. So all these resources are available and they're all free to use. The counting string would be great for teachers to model how many sounds are in a word. They just drag a bead over each time they hear a sound. The board in the middle is something that can be manipulated by students. So you can have students share their screen with you and show you how they're sounding out a word. The last one could be used with younger students as well, who are really still practicing their phonemic awareness skills and sorting pictures of words that they hear into buckets based on how many sounds are in that word. So a lot of different options that you can use here. When it comes to phonics, this is where we are going to attach those phoneme and grapheme correspondences so that students know which letters make which sounds in which contexts. So before, you might have done this by showing students letter cards, maybe going around the kidney table with them, having them repeat after you, doing it individually. So while we do want to think about how students are going to demonstrate that they're knowing this skill or practice this skill as a whole group, we also want to recognize there's a couple of ways that we can do this. We could even have students practice this asynchronously by sending them a video like the one you see here, where they listen to sounds to build up that fluency and that understanding. Again, you might also use some interactive type tools online where students can drag letters to match sounds or to build words and even to be able to decode words as well. The pictures on the far right are examples of what we saw in iSpire, where students can manipulate letter tiles as well as the little sound circles in order to be able to identify consonants versus vowels in words as well. When it comes to fluency, we really want to then take those phonics skills that we've just been practicing to be able to read whole words accurately as well as quickly, because once students are able to read fluently, they're going to be able to comprehend text even better. Now, before, when we're talking about individual words with fluency, we might have had students using tangible word cards that they could manipulate either by holding them up to read them quickly for automaticity or by sorting them in different ways. All of these options are still available to do online. So you could create a slide that might have a lot of different words on it, and students are looking for a particular pattern and circling the words or highlighting them with an online highlighter, like a tool in Slides. You could also create word sorts. And again, these resources that we linked have some samples pre-made for you and templates that you could use already in PowerPoint or Slides. But this would be a way to have students practicing reading individual words and then sorting them based on their patterns and structures. And then there's also ways to build fluency with sentence reading. I know when I was teaching and using Wilson, there was a workbook that students had where they'd read through sentences and they'd mark them up to identify the different patterns, read through them. With virtual learning, I might not be able to send those workbook homes, especially if I can't get them back. And so while we might not be able to give students tangible materials there, we could, if we can't send home a paper packet, create slides or use videos already created online that have fluency sentences built in based on different word patterns. And then when it comes to vocabulary, this is where it's going to be crucial for us to give students that information about words that are going to appear in the connected text that they read. Sometimes these might be decodable words and it might follow the word pattern. So for instance, if you're teaching the digraph SH, you might teach words that have that are related to the story that you're teaching, especially if you're using a decodable reader. But there's going to be other high frequency or irregular words that you would normally have to just teach by sight or memorization. You might have used different manipulatives in person to help teach students these words. But we have found some resources here that you can use virtually as well, including different methods that we have just learned about. One of them is teaching by heart, which I thought was really cool. It has students mark up the words with hearts for sounds that don't match their normal sound patterns. So again, all of these links are here. So when you get the slide deck, you can click through to explore those on your own too. But you want to think about how you explicitly teach vocabulary as well as decodable words. And then when we take all of these skills, we want to put them together to help students read a connected text, whether it is controlled with only decodable words or whether it is more grade level text that we want them to support. We want to support them with reading through. So you can either email them decodable books that they can read online or print out on their own if they have access to a printer at home. I know a lot of schools are doing material distribution where you can print off packets of work. So these would be another great option to be able to print and send home with students. You could also type different stories into a document or Google Slides and add audio. So again, if the focus here is more on comprehension as opposed to decoding, that way adding the audio would help students to really practice hearing the stories read fluently and see how a good reader might read them in order to then be able to understand the text. There's also a lot of online text available. You can create different types of assessments, whether you're using Google Forms like pictured here, or some programs will even have different activities with thinking maps or cause and effect activities, things like that, that you can pair with your connected text in order to boost that comprehension skill. Again, a lot of our instruction is not going to translate directly from what we did in the classroom. So while I might have had my students for 45 to 60 minutes a day, 5 days a week during our intervention block, that's not necessarily going to look the same during virtual learning. It might even be more difficult based on attendance, depending on when my small group occurs in the day. So I want to have some backup activities that students can do asynchronously, and there are a lot of options out there. So whether you're using pre-recorded videos, whether you make them on your own or you send them a playlist of sorts that have videos that they can watch through on their own, that's one way to build students' skills with phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency. You can also use different websites and apps to have students more manipulate the different skills that they're learning or practice applying the skills that they're learning. But Gojit is one that we love. We use it a lot for thinking maps and different sorting and matching activities. And Teacher Monster to Read is really fun, especially for elementary age students. And then finally, if you have the option, or for students who have more significant disabilities, you might be able to send home tangible materials like task boxes. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but this would be a great way to send home either those word mats or some sample word cards or even Play-Doh that students can manipulate in order to build and spell words on their own. So think about the different materials that you might be able to send home to help students with their learning, even when you're connecting with them virtually. So when you think about your reading instruction, you do want to think about it as a very linear model, but as well as cyclical. You're going to repeat this model again and again. You want to start with planning. So when you do plan, there are some guiding questions that you need to think through as you work through each of the different parts of reading instruction. We have created an editable lesson plan template that you can use that really helps you think through what are the questions that I need to consider when I'm teaching each part of my reading intervention lesson. You also then want to integrate as many online materials as you can to make it multisensory and engaging for students. Again, we know how urgently students need to recoup some of their lost learning here when it comes to reading, and so we want students to be really invested in their lesson. This link here, the University of Florida has a great resource hub with pages and pages of pre-made materials that we've just loved. They're really nicely done, really clean, and really targeted on specific skills. So we've linked that there as a potential resource you could use while teaching. And then finally, we do want to make sure that we are still finding ways to incorporate progress monitoring within our instruction. So whether this looks like checks for understanding within lessons or different probes at the end, or maybe you're still doing your weekly Ames Web or FastBridge reading probes with students virtually, we do want to make sure that we are incorporating that assessment and then adjusting our future planning based on those students' needs that we're collecting from the data. So we are finished with our instruction right now, but we do have time for questions. We appreciate everyone hopping on this Friday morning, especially before fall break. After fall break, we will be doing a coffee chat session on math intervention and how to use data-based decision-making when you're planning for your math intervention. So we hope that you'll join us then on October 16th.